So it's my delight today to welcome Bill McKibben, who's going to be speaking to us on In the Hottest Year, Where Do We Stand? Notes from Climate Fight. If I can just say, we're so thrilled to have Bill with us. Bill has literally coined the terms that we are going to be using today. And we are thankful to him, not only for coining those terms, but for developing iconic organizations that we all know and that we all have read about, and that in which we have all participated. So we're super excited to have Bill here. Bill, you'll talk to us for a while, and then we'll have a little bit of time for a back and forth. We know your time is precious, so we're really thrilled that you're joining us. So Bill, let me give you the floor, and I'm going to put you on speaker. Thank you.
Sure. Well, thank you very much, Francis, and everybody else. What a pleasure to get to join you, if only virtually, in one of my favorite places in the world. Good greetings from the Green Mountains of Vermont, where we finally had our first snowstorm of the winter on the second day of spring. And it's beautiful here. And if I seem mildly distracted, it's the other thing that happened this weekend was the birth of my first grandchild. So it's now that I know someone who's going to be alive in 2100, it adds a certain extra layer of piquancy to the whole thing. I thought I'd just talk at you for about 20 minutes and tell you where we are from my point of view, and then we'll have a question or two, or abuse, or a comment, or whatever comes to mind. When I wrote The End of Nature back in 1989, I think it must have been 2023, 2024 that I was kind of thinking about imagining, because the last 12 months have really seen a new level of the physical unraveling of this planet. Beginning about this time last year, the oceanographers were all calling me and saying something's going very wrong with the sea surface temperatures. They'd been, of course, going up for a very long time, but suddenly they were spiking to the degree that by June we were seeing buoys off the Florida Keys registering the hottest temperatures we've ever seen in the oceans anywhere, 101 degrees, which is about where you'd put your hot tub. And that heat came on land by June. The summer solstice in the northern hemisphere is usually the hottest averaged days on this planet, just because there's more land mass in the northern hemisphere to trap heat. And so last June, we were seeing the hottest days we've ever recorded. The records go back with thermometers about 200 years, but as you guys all know, the scientists are able to push it back much further with tree rings, and many of them from northern Arizona, from lake sediments and glacial cores and things. People were certain that we were seeing the hottest days in at least the last 125,000 years. It's about 125,000 years ago, the anthropologists tell us that, human beings started etching designs on bone. So these are the hottest temperatures that anybody that we would sort of recognize as having a society like ours has ever lived through. And of course, the living through part is difficult, and some people don't. On the East Coast last year, we had these tremendous fires in Canada, followed by tremendous floods in places like Vermont, where I live. But we remain rich enough that we can more or less cope for the moment, just as Flagstaff copes with all those floods and so on and so forth. Not true in most of the world. To me, the most poignant event of the year was in September, when the biggest rainstorm in the history of Libya washed away 2 dams, and then in the course of an hour swept about 10,000 people out to sea, where they drowned. That kind of biblical craziness is now sadly commonplace. and it afflicts the people who have done the least to cause this problem. All of Africa, including Libya, have put about 3% of all the greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, compared with about 25% for America. So the iron law of climate change remains: the less you did to cause it, the more and the quicker and the harder you get hit. 2024 is starting out hotter even than 2023. We've breached that 1.5 degrees Celsius barrier that we promised in Paris to respect. We're on track at the moment for something closer to 3 degrees Celsius. If we get anywhere near that, we will not have civilizations like the ones we currently enjoy. That's just too much violent chaos and flux. Among other things, the UN predicts that it would produce between 1 billion and 3 billion climate refugees, because it just gets too hot to grow food, or your delta is now underwater, and I mean, we have some sense of what that would do to our world. A million refugees on our southern border, not far from you, were enough to discombobulate the politics of this country in profound and disturbing and ugly ways. Now multiply that by 1,000 and try to imagine what kind of world we're living in. So our job is to arrest that rise as fast as ever we can. Not to stop global warming, it's too late for that, but to stop it short of the point where it cuts civilization off at the knees. So the good news, and I know I'm telling you things you already know, but just to kind of read you into the latest data, is that we more or less know how to do that. The essential task is to make a rapid transition to renewable energy. And the scientists have dropped the cost of power from the sun and the wind 90% in the last decade. Someplace along there, they passed some invisible line to become cheaper than the cost of producing power from coal or gas or oil. We live on a planet where the cheapest way to make energy is to point a sheet of glass at the sun. And the second cheapest is to catch the breeze in a turbine. And that's remarkable gift, a kind of tremendous shift that I think most people haven't fully taken on board. We still tend to think about sun power and wind power as alternative energy, as the kind of whole foods of energy. But in reality, they're kind of the Costco of energy at this point. The cheapest, most obvious way to do what we need to do. Now, it would be hard to move as fast as we need to move, even if everybody was working in good faith. The scientists tell us that we need to cut emissions in half by 2030. That's on the bleeding edge of the technically possible. But, of course, not everybody is working in good faith. And we continue to face the entrenched opposition of the fossil fuel industry, who will not change. As the CEO of Exxon said last week, he has no interest in investing in renewable energy because it doesn't return above average profits to his investors. That's worth thinking about for a moment. What he's saying is that the real problem with solar power and wind power is that no one owns the sun or the wind. That once you have the solar panel up, the sun delivers the energy for free when it rises above the horizon. And you can make money doing that, but you can't make Exxon scale money because you don't control the reserves of sunlight. You don't have it banked away underground where you own it. And so you can't charge people more every month for the privilege of having some. That's why they have spent 30 years denying the existence of climate change. And now that it's impossible to deny it, there have been too many floods and too many fires, now they're engaged in what might be called solutions denial, an effort to slow down the pace of change by insisting that we're not ready to go to EVs or solar panels or batteries or whatever it is that they're going after. Even though, in fact, these technologies are now robust and essential. So the fight is not only against inertia, which is always a force in human affairs, but it's also a fight against vested interest. And probably that's the harder part of the fight. And that's why we spend a lot of time organizing the ways that we do, building the movements that we've built in order to try and stand up to the power of the fossil fuel industry. I think that that movement building should be getting easier and easier, because increasingly we have a kind of beautiful option to hold out this idea that we could run the planet, not by setting things on fire here on the surface, coal, gas, oil, wood, the things that we've been burning for a long time now. Out the fire at the power plant and replace it with the fire that's burns 93 million miles away in the sky and whose rays we can catch on PV panels, and we can take advantage of the fact that it differentially heats the earth, producing the winds that turn those turbines, and on and on and on. That's a remarkable moment. The idea that we could transition from, as it were, energy from hell to energy from heaven, and that we could do it fast. And if we did it, not only would we take a serious chunk out of the existential climate problem, we would also address probably the single biggest addressable public health problem on Earth, the 9 million people who die each year, 1 death in 5 on this planet, from breathing the combustion byproducts of fossil fuel, mostly those particulates that lodge in your lungs and do you in. If you've been to Delhi
Well, we
or
need to kill them
Shanghai
off somehow.
in recent years, then you have some sense of how prevalent that problem is. But in fact, hundreds of thousands of American kids come down with childhood asthma every year from breathing particulates. And we know who gets to live next to highways and refineries and things, and why this is such a moving to energy from the sun and wind would have the providential impact of disempowering the jerks who currently own our energy supply, be they the Koch brothers, our biggest oil and gas barons, who used their winnings to degrade our democracy, or be it the king of Saudi Arabia, who cuts off the heads of journalists he doesn't like, or most transparently, Vladimir Putin, who took his hydrocarbon cash and used it to launch a land war in Europe in the 21st century. I mean, um, and so the idea that the sun and the wind are everywhere is a really beautiful one, and allows us to think about local economies in somewhat the same way that we've begun understanding local food in recent years. Local electrons are even easier in a lot of ways, and even probably even more important. We're going to have to organize to get done what we need doing in the short time that we have. And that's why we form things like, well, I started 350.org, which became the first global grassroots climate campaign. And, led the opposition to the Keystone Pipeline and started this vast fossil fuel divestment campaign and things. I did that with college students, and they did fantastic work, and have gone on to do fantastic work. The kids who did those divestment campaigns on college campuses graduated to form the Sunrise Movement and bring us the Green New Deal, which was the seed of the Inflation Reduction Act once it had been passed through Joe Manchin and the congressional sausage making machinery. And around the world, of course, the same thing. Young people doing astonishing work. You all know Greta Thunberg, and you should. She's one of my favorite people to work with. I adore her. I had the real pleasure of writing her a letter last June to congratulate her on her graduation from high school. I mean, think about that for a minute. Um, um, but I did at a certain point hear one too many people my age say, oh, it's up to the next generation to solve these problems, which seems A, ignoble, and B, highly impractical, given that we have a short period of time, not enough for these kids to grow up and become senators and CEOs. Uh, they lack by themselves the structure or belong to in our society? Well, I'd say as a basic rule of thumb, if you've reached the age where you have hair growing out of your ears, you probably have structural power coming out your ears too. There are 70 million of us over the age of 60 in this country. It's larger than the population of France, but we punch way above our weight even there, um, mostly because we all vote. There is no known way to stop old people from voting. Okay? And we ended up with most of the country's financial assets. Fair or not, we got about 70% of the money. So if you want to push around Wall Street or Washington or your state capital, then it's good to have some people with hairlines like mine, which is why 2 years ago we started this thing called Third Act to try and mobilize progressive older Americans to work on the twin problems of climate and democracy. And it's gone like gangbusters, I got to say. There's now chapters pretty much every state in the country, and um, we're closing in, I think, on 100,000 people engaged in this work, and they are fantastic at it. Um, didn't other people because the political scientists have been telling people for years that as you grow older, you become more conservative. If that was true at one point, I think it's not so true now, because if you think about it, if you're in your 60s or 70s or 80s now, your first act was in that period of really remarkable social, cultural, political transformation in the 1960s and 1970s, when we first started taking women seriously in public life, the apex of the civil rights movement, the first Earth Day in 1970, when 20 million Americans, 10% of the then population, were in the streets. And I have no doubt that there's plenty of people on this call who were in the streets that day in April of 1970. And by going in the streets, got us within 2 years the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and the EPA. And what do you know? It worked. The air got cleaner, and so did the water. If you have any doubt about how important that period was, just look at what our retrograde Supreme Court has been going after. The Voting Rights Act of 1965, Gun Control Act of 1968, Clean Air Act of 1971, and Roe v. Wade 1973. Those of us my age lived our lives with those protections. And if we won those fights once, we can win them again, which is why we've been campaigning in all the ways we can think of, largely to back up young people in their fight. So, for instance, a couple of years ago now, the American chapter of Fridays for the Future, Greta's group, said, we want to take on these big banks that fund the fossil fuel industry. Chase, Citi, Wells Fargo, and Bank of America are the four biggest funders in the world of the fossil fuel industry. But they said, we don't even have checking accounts or credit cards or anything, so they won't listen to us. Can you help us? We were, sure. And I remember the first demonstration we organized, they helped organize, there were hundreds of high school kids there because they all know what's going on. And they're somewhat sprier, so they were at the head of the march. But at the back, there was a big group of us with the banner that said, fossils against fossil fuels. And the kids were like, you know what? Thank you. It's good not to feel abandoned for a while. And we've gone on. Last spring, we organized 100 demonstrations in 100 cities simultaneously outside these banks. I was in Washington where we staged big sit-ins to close the banks down. I've reached the age where sprawling on the sidewalk for 4 or 5 hours is less fun than it used to be. So we went to all the Goodwill stores all around the greater Washington area and ended up with hundreds and hundreds of rocking chairs, which we used to shut down the banks. The New York Times the next day called it the rocking chair rebellion. So, we're doing our best. In the fall, we kind of helped spearhead this campaign that produced a big victory when the Biden administration agreed to pause permitting for LNG exports, the single biggest carbon bomb on the planet, which, at least for the moment, we've helped diffuse a bit. And now we're deep into the campaign, doing what we can to try and prevent Donald Trump from taking back the White House, because it's abundantly clear that that would stop whatever momentum has been built up in the direction of change. And we can't afford another 4 year pause, another interregnum in all of this. So, if you know any, people of a certain age, tell your grandparents about us. So, let them know, because we're having fun, and I think we're now really figuring out how to make a lot of good trouble. Um, I can't promise you that any of this is going to win. We're fighting on 100 fronts, and I'm so grateful to all the people who were at Flagstaff City Council today, doing what they could. Um, we're fighting on 1,000 fronts all the time, but it is very true that the physical momentum of the warming of the planet is very strong, and sometimes very scary to me. The fact that the poles are now melting rapidly is a bad sign, because the amount of momentum that builds up in systems like that is extremely hard to reverse. But we know that we can affect how high the temperature gets, and we know that each quarter or half a degree that we manage to knock off that total means tens of millions of square miles of land that are still habitable, hundreds of millions of people who get to stay in the place that they were born and that they love, and so on and so forth. So it is not just a good fight, it's the most important fight that our species has ever undertaken. And in certain ways, the most interesting. I think it's fair to say that it's kind of a test of whether the big brain was a good adaptation or not. It got us in a lot of trouble, and now the question is, can it get us out? And my guess, after having spent the last 3.5 decades volunteering in this fight, my guess is that it's going to be less the size of the brain than the size of the heart that the brain is attached to, and that it's to all of you who are enmeshed in this fight, and hope that you will find all the most useful ways to get as much leverage as you possibly can, because I think that's really what it takes at this point is leverage. Americans default towards the individual in all things, you know, but we're way past the point where we're going to solve this thing one Tesla at a time. Um, the the most important thing an individual can do, I think, is be less of an individual and join together with others in groups large enough to change the basic political and economic ground rules at as large a level, as high a level as is possible. Some of that will be local, but some of it needs to be state and national and global too, in order to have the impact that we need in the time that we still have remaining. So it's a great pleasure to get to be a fellow traveler with you all in this work. And I will much look forward to the next opportunity to get to that most beautiful corner of the country, and just get to be shoulder to shoulder with you. But it's fun tonight just to get to phone in. And I'm going to stop. And if people had a few questions or critique or whatever else, feel free to unload at this point. I don't know, Francis, quite how you want to
Sure.
manage this process, but
Well, first of all, let me say thanks, Bill, for a really inspiring talk and equally important, again, your lifetime of really monumental work. So thanks for joining us. I had a question which you answered, sort of going off your Tesla comment, in that often we find that, right, folks have difficulty moving from individual acquisitions, responses. I bought solar panels for my house to getting involved politically. And so I really appreciated your statement that be less of an individual and join with others to change the ground rules, I think is so important. Well, people can post questions in the chat. We have a few minutes for questions. Brandon did ask, and we're getting hearts and power signs here. Brandon did ask regarding Exxon and the fossil fuel industry. Biden talked about no new leases for drilling, but I've heard the major issue is all the existing leases. Have we made any progress on that?
This is true. I mean, or it's certainly part of it. And we've leased too much land, drilled too much oil, whatever. There are limits to what the president's legally allowed to do, and it's in so we don't get another big bonus round of yet more leases and things. It's not that Biden's doing everything right, because he's not. He remains in thrall too much of his administration to the oil industry. But I think the hope is that a second term, look, the the best chance for change that we ever get is in second terms of Democratic administrations, because freed from the need to run for reelection, they're able to move a little more aggressively than they otherwise would. Um, um, you know, it's hard. I remember going to lunch with a former president of the United States had me down to Washington a little while ago for lunch to talk about climate change. Um, and he said, one point very early on, he said, the most salient political fact in America is the price of a gallon of gasoline. And that's true. And there's no way to just wish it away and get around it. But it's one of the reasons why it'll be a very happy day when we have electric vehicles widespread enough that that's no longer the most salient political.
Yeah.
One wishes that we could return to a state of nature here, back to some tabula rasa, but that's not going to happen. The question is, how much further are we going to go into this mess?
Another question from Carrie Hall. First, congrats on the pause of the LNG. How do we best judge the power of the pressure campaign?
Well, I mean, in that case, we got what we wanted, and we did it without having to go and we had 800 of us old people signed up to do 3 days worth of civil disobedience outside the Department of Energy in February. And with about 2 weeks to go, we got the thing we'd asked for, this pause. And so we were able to call that off, which frankly, A, the best actions are the ones you never have to do. And B, the thought of having 800 people my age in the middle of February outside in the streets of Washington, I mean, we were prepared to do it, but I was glad we didn't have to. And so that campaign worked pretty well, but part of it was the timing, and part of it was the brilliant collaboration between frontline groups from Louisiana, who have to live with the reality of these monstrous terminals wrecking their landscape and fouling their air, combined with the people around the country who are interested in climate. And that's often what it takes to have an effective campaign, because you have people who have intense local interest, are willing to fight really, really hard. Um, but by definition, if you need a federal decision, a local campaign is not going to be enough to get it. There's not enough people who care about the coast of Louisiana
Mhm.
or the air over Lake Charles or whatever it is. But if they can combine with the much larger but less centrally interested group of people who care about the climate and see themselves making common cause, then it becomes very powerful. That was the formula we used to beat the Keystone Pipeline. Um, and it was the formula that we used again here. And I think it's a smart way to go about it as we build these campaigns. That said, I don't think we can continue to rely on mostly campaigns against things. They're important to beat big oil, but we're going to have, I think, a set of campaigns in the next year or two to really, really raise the. I hope that we're. I hope that we're able to. I hope that in the next year or two, um, along with raising the specter of the cloud of carbon, I hope we're able to raise the idea that there's something extraordinarily beautiful about the possibility of relying on the sun for the energy that we need. You know, if you go back far enough in all our cultural and religious traditions, I think we're probably all sun worshippers back at some beginning point. And the idea of recapturing that human connection to our remarkable neighboring heavenly body seems very powerful to me. And it's one of the things we're going to be working on in the years to come.
Thank you. I know our time is short, maybe one more question. Uh, one more question since I know that Bill is short on time and I keep jumping out, but there was a question posed about young people and how to get young people how do you help people think about eco-anxiety, and how do you help people remain positive through these very difficult times?
These are good questions. Eco anxiety is very real, very rational, and I share it, you know, at some very, very cellular level. What we're doing scares the dickens out of me and sometimes depresses me. I was saying the antidote to that kind of anxiety, which is quite rational, is action, but it's got to be plausible action. Young people, I think, actually have a better bullshit detector than older people. Um, and they're not fooled by the idea that changing some light bulbs or, you know,
Mhm.
buying a Prius or something is going to actually shift this very much. They need to see that we're taking together really serious action. And it's why this collaboration between old and young has been so fruitful at Third Act and so much fun. Um, um, the the antidote to the degree that there is one to eco anxiety is just that kind of collaboration that seems like it might actually be getting somewhere. You have to set targets and goals that are big enough to matter, you know. When we took on this LNG thing, we were able to say if this thing keeps building out at its current state, by the time 2030 rolls around, US LNG exports will produce more greenhouse gas emissions than everything that happens in Europe. Every car and home and factory from Athens to Helsinki. And when people heard that, they were like, okay, in that case, we really should go to work on it and let's stop it. And we had this great collaboration of old people getting ready to go do civil disobedience and young people on TikTok by the zillions, you know, putting up uh, posts that were, you know, producing hundreds of thousands of petition signatures and things. And between those two groups, the Biden administration heard it loud and clear. They're like, we want no part of this. we'll do what we can here to head you off. And uh, you know, um, I guess the only other thing I would say is, uh, and you guys are lucky enough to live in a place where this is possible, um, and this is a good place to end. Um, do I find it essential to figure out how to get outdoors a little bit every day, at least a little bit. Um, you know, we're the one creature that is capable of sort of self-consciously witnessing the beauty of the world around us. And so that's clearly one of our tasks. In a lot of trouble. It's not going to be any more intact in our lifetimes than it is right now. So part of our job is to get out there and just see it some, and to take young people who may not feel as comfortable in the outdoors out there to see it some and spend some time. And if you do, you'll be rewarded not only with the beauty of the day, but the people who fight hardest for the world around us are the ones who have fallen in love with it.
Mhm.
And, nobody falls in love with someone that they think is terminally ill, or very few people do. It's just too painful. And nobody falls in love with a world that they think is doomed. So it's important to say that we're not doomed, um, but we're in a lot of trouble. And that should be the thing that rouses us. Maybe the metaphor that seems most useful to me is this glorious planet that we were born onto is running a very high fever now. And the only antibodies that are going to come to its defense and try and knock down that fever are us. We know where the infection is, it's the fossil fuel industry. And our job is to figure out how to surround, isolate, and break the power of that industry so that our body, in this case, can begin to heal itself. And so that's our job. And look, not every time somebody gets a horrible fever, do they get well? Sometimes they die. We don't know what the outcome of this fight is, but we can't let that deter us from engaging in it. Just the opposite. The fact that we don't know how it all comes out is the thing that should spur us on all the time. This is by far the biggest, most interesting, hairiest challenge that our species has ever wandered into. So let's suck it up and do all that we can, and do all that we can before we check out. That's part of the work at third act, is just understanding that once you're nearer the exit than you are the entrance, there's a whole range of things that are available to you to do. um, and that's why we like doing them. I'll end by saying that when I organized the big demonstrations at the start of the fight against the Keystone Pipeline in 2011, which are still the biggest civil disobedience actions in the environmental movement in many decades. The letter I wrote asking people to come get arrested said, I do not think young people, an arrest record might not be the best thing
Mhm.
for your resume. One of the few unmixed blessings of growing older is, past a certain point, what the hell are they going to do to you? And so when people showed up to get arrested, we didn't ask them, how old are you? That would be rude. But we did say, cleverly, I think, who was president when you were born? And the biggest cohorts came from the FDR and the Truman
Mm.
administrations. It was really good for the young people who were there to see their elders acting the way that we need elders acting. Not necessarily getting arrested, though a surprising number of people tell me that it's on their bucket list. Um, uh, but people outside their comfort zones. Our planet
Yeah.
is a mile outside its comfort zone. So we better be outside ours a little bit, whatever that means for you. And I know that you already are. And I just want to say thank you for it, and just figure out now how to make that commitment as effective as it's possible to make it. And I think that means joining in people doing as effective work as possible on as large a level as possible. So there I end and say good night from the Green Mountains, and good afternoon to those of you there in that beautiful, beautiful country of canyons and mesas, and buttes, and all the things that you have. Thank you for taking good care of it and for taking good care of this planet. So God
Thank,
bless.
thank you so much for your inspiration, and congratulations on your grandchild.
Thank you very much. Take care, y'all.
So thank you all very much for coming. And the idea was for Bill to present, and then for Dr. Francis Riemer and myself to continue. And I'm hoping that Francis can get back on. But in any case, I was going to speak with you all about the troubles with implementation. I think you all are most likely climate activists, as I and Francis are. And we've been doing a lot of work here in Flagstaff, including what was going on today. Today, we had a group of climate deniers here in Flagstaff who had proposed to our city council to undermine our carbon neutrality plan, which we had fought hard for. And I know you all have had various successes and struggles with your climate actions. I don't know, can we raise a hand? Let's, since the room is smaller now, everybody please share your cameras and please unmute and please join in. I'm sure that you all have had struggles of one sort or another. Well, our struggle at the moment is a group of climate deniers who have proposed to City Council to undermine the carbon neutrality plan, which is the key piece of foundation that we have to interact with City Hall and influence its decisions about billion-dollar developments that we have here in Flagstaff, if you can imagine, and a variety of different things. So I don't know, I'm hoping that we can share some of our challenges and opportunities. I know that this is a challenge for climate groups all over the globe. And you'd think that when you're working on climate activism and moving your community along in these efforts, that really that just passing the policies, getting the city council to pass the policies, getting the COP28 folks to pass the policies, and so forth, would be our main challenge. But it turns out there's a whole nother level of challenge in implementing the things that get passed. So our job isn't done when we get COP28 to pass policies, when we get our own city councils to pass policies. The job continues, unfortunately. So there's a question in the chat. Where can we get a link to the recording? And those are on our website, which I put into the chat just a few moments ago. We are the Northern Arizona Climate Change Alliance, and we have made all of the earlier recordings of these presentations available on our website, www.NAZCCA.org, and that's NAZCCA. You can see it in my own label on my picture here.
Who's that? I don't know. Interesting.
Did you all see that in the chat? www.nazcca.org. And all of the earlier presentations and this one are all going to be available on that website.
Stefan, it looks like we have a question from Iris.
Yes, Iris.
Hi there, thank you. It's not a question as much as a comment, and I apologize I missed Bill's talk. Today was a crazy day, but I understand that there's a recording. But in terms of biggest challenges. So, and this is maybe a little outside what Bill was talking about and what you're talking about. It seems more and more clear to me that we need a huge paradigm shift in our culture, in our global culture, and specifically in the global North. Maybe a bunch of you have read a book called Less is More by Jason Hickel, and the whole degrowth movement, and the idea that green growth is growth. And and the more we grow, anything we grow, and capitalism is a system of expansion, the more resources we'll use. So even if we, switch to all electricity, I mean, it's kind of an impossible scenario to think we can continue to grow and not have our emissions continue to increase. So I'm feeling, though I'm involved in a bunch of different groups. In fact, I have a meeting tonight with somebody who's on this call right now, and a bunch of other people. I'm beginning to feel a bit hopeless about it all. Yeah.
Well, Iris, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us. Yes, we have a huge challenge, and it's easy to lose hope. My own background is in climate science, and I'm a recently retired professor from Northern Arizona University. The challenge is enormous, but we've got a strong path forward. I know that Bill was giving you these same kinds of encouragements. And I know you all have had a mixture of challenge and hope, and I know you all are working very hard. The good news, of course, is that we have many people working on this, and we know what the solutions are. We know in great detail what we need to move forward on. And so I hope you will not give up, Iris, or any of the rest of you, and you will continue to strengthen your efforts. We know what the solutions are. In fact, I've got a couple of different presentations on the NAZCCA website that are part of this particular series. And so do not give up hope. The difficulty is getting everybody else to work with us. And so that's one of the things that NAZCCA works on strongly through this climate series, through this presentation series. And the solutions are not as difficult as you might think they are. Take a
All
look
right.
at my presentations on finding solutions to climate change, as well as what we all are doing in so many different efforts and ways.
All right, Stefan, we got a question from Robert.
Robert, go ahead.
I like your discussion of the paradigm shift because that's what I feel is going on, really. I was a Vietnam War resistor, went to prisons, got into climate in the 70s and 80s, was there on Earth Day when Bill was talking about the 1970 Earth Day. And I sort of reached an end point when I thought of starting an extinction rebellion in my local town of Ashland, Oregon. But I didn't want to go to prison or jail again. I'm 76. I don't want to do that. And I saw the power of the Vietnam protests. Couple thousand people going to prison, another 250,000 people refusing to cooperate with the selective service system. A year later, boom, war crashed. I see that. But I've come to believe now that as a excuse me, as a member of the Climate Coaching Alliance and seeing how coaches are working with sustainability and eco-anxiety, I'm sort of realizing that the coaching corporate level is not going to work. It's not working. COP29 will not take us anywhere that the first 28 COPs didn't take us. And the first 28 COPs didn't even mention fossil fuels. They said greenhouse gas emissions. And now they're saying that they're not going to phase them out. They're going to transition. I mean, it's going nowhere. But on the individual level, Greta had 4 to 7 million people together in 2019 out on your local downtown plaza with a sign, frequent flyer, climate denier, or whatever. That was powerful stuff. And I think the paradigm shift that was mentioned is this, that as we move from thinking as, excuse me, thinking that we're going to move the corporations, that we're going to move the CEOs of the oil companies through protests, we'll have to shift to an individual level carbon footprint consciousness that spreads throughout the cultures and society in the world. And I had read a couple of years ago, I read an essay from one of Greta's 15-year-old friends from New York, Alejandro Villaseñor. She said, older people, you who have grown up and your kids have moved away and they're not at the house anymore, go to your local high school. Go to your local high school, talk about climate. So a year ago, I read that and I went, what? I could do this. And I went to my local high school and I talked with the vice principal and he got super excited about a class, a climate class, that would deal with eco-anxiety. I had posted the question about eco-anxiety because I see the young people, most young people, depressed and in a really bad way. And I know that once you shift into the action mode, you feel good and you can fly. And that's what all the 60s, rebellious people and Bill McKibben said, they just get into the action and they're not depressed and in that negativity. So I went to the local high school. The vice principal was super excited. He said his daughter had just come down. She was 12, come down to the kitchen, and she was weeping at the kitchen table. And he asked, what's wrong? And she looked up and she said, climate. And she continued to weep. And he understands that. Our kids are really upset. One of my best friends won't mention anything about climate to her 10-year-old because they don't want to face it. And as the Yale Climate Opinion Survey has found out in the United States, we just don't talk about it. It's not heard about. So anyway, the vice principal shunted me to the environmental sciences teacher, and he didn't really want to have any talk about emotional anxiety in his environmental science class, just stalactites and volcanoes, keep it straight science. But I think there could be a shift, and I think a lot of people could get on board and change things. There's 50 million students out there, 4 million teachers, 850,000 retired educators and teachers. It could happen, but it has to happen on a more individual level where you decide, okay, this is going to be my eco project. I'm going to do this for my environment, my ecology, and then work at it. And you see other people doing that, like Greta, not flying to New York, taking a sailboat instead, or sleeping in Davos, 3,900 feet at 20 degrees in a tent. You see those actions and it just creates this inspiration that moves, like in the 60s. And in the 60s, smoking got sort of stopped. Over the 60 years from 1900 to 1950 or so, 1964, smoking just straight up, just like emissions. But in 1964, Surgeon General put out the report and people realized, well, this is cancer. And the curve went straight down. By 2020, it's like gone. So the emissions is going straight up, but the people need to get on board. It could go down. Anyway, I'm sorry I talked so much.
No, that's all correct. And we've got lots of good plans. So here in Flagstaff, we've got lots of successes, but at a larger scale, Jacobson et al., a group of engineers out of Stanford University and other from countries all around the world, put together a plan for how to reach net zero. This was a plan in 2017, so they now are a little bit behind the curve, but they put together a plan in 2017 for 139 countries to implement technology that we already have in hand to reach net zero. At that time, their goal was in 2050. Now, we know that that is not soon enough at this point. We really need to be doing these things much sooner, but we know how to reach net zero. And we know how to do that at a cost of somewhere around $1.6 billion per year between now and then. Again, that needs to be revised, but we know how to do it. The trouble is getting everybody on board to implement that plan, right? And so what we're doing at NAZCCA is we're pushing locally to achieve that. The city and the university here in town have both set their goals to be net zero by 2030. And they are not well on their way to reach that goal, but they know how to do it. And so now we need to reach all of our contemporaries here in town to push for the implementation of that plan. And that's really the challenge. We have had at COP28, we have had the Paris Climate Agreement and all these different things. But again and again, we're bumping into the problem of implementation. And that really requires reaching a large portion of our fellow human beings so that we can push together for the implementation of things that we already have planned. So we are here in Flagstaff. We now have a column in the Daily Sun, which is our local paper, called Spotlight on Climate, and that comes out every month. So we're trying to reach people that way. We're trying to reach people through this particular speaker series, where we are holding protests, putting on presentations with our fellow citizens, and in every way we know how, trying to get the word out on the importance of climate change so that we can get them all on board to push for the implementation of policies that we already have in place. In 2018, we got the city of Flagstaff to pass first develop and then pass in 2018, a climate action and adaptation plan. By 2020, we got the city and the university to declare climate emergencies. In 2021, we got the city to pass the carbon neutrality plan, which also set the goal to be carbon neutral by 2030. Now we are doing, it's not a done deal, because we're now working on getting the city to implement that plan. In many ways, it's easier to get policies and plans passed than it is to get them to implement them. And so it's an ongoing piece of work. Heidi, you were speaking earlier. Or anybody, please join the conversation. What are your local challenges? Are you building groups to address those challenges? How are you organizing? Yes, Brandon.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, it was honestly, in my experience, it seems that we've almost got too much focus on the scientific technicals of how to achieve net zero, and there's not as much focus on how to specifically build the power needed to pass this legislation, like real research on how to pull off a march on Washington or other major Earth Day, like we were referencing in the 1970s. We keep on referencing that 1970s Earth Day, but when was the last time anyone my age had the opportunity to do something like that? The last time was like Standing Rock and then the 2019 climate strikes. But since the pandemic, there's been a real struggle in achieving the turnout and engagement that we had pre-pandemic. So I was specifically wondering about that. How have you all sort of managed to get past that trouble with turnout and to keep the movements, or to keep the organization chugging along and active? Have you had any better practices that'll help out with that? But that's my
So
question.
you're asking me specifically about NAZCA?
Yeah, you mentioned that there was protests at City Hall around the plan that you've had, and I was wondering, like, were you able to turn out a lot of people? What was the struggle? Because in Miami, we also had a bunch of like pro climate or capitalism is pro planet. They hosted an event to try and frame climate change as something that business can solve. So I was wondering, yeah, how has the movement building been going for NAZCA? Do you have any struggles? Do you have any lessons?
Well, thank you for your question, Brandon. So when COVID hit, it kind of set us back. We had a radio show going, also called Spotlight on Climate, and suddenly it was little neighborhood radio station, and they did not have the capability to take phone calls. So we suddenly could not really do our interviews and presentations that we had planned. But we started doing shoe strikes. We learned from a lady, Petra Palmen in Sweden, who I met at an earlier, this was, prior to COVID, well, right in the first year of COVID, I should say. We had Bill McKibben speak for our speaker series then as well. And I met Petra Palmen, and they were doing shoe strikes. Have you all heard of shoe strikes? So shoe strikes are where everybody donates their shoes. And then rather than gathering a large number of people, you lay out a large grid of shoes on display and then just a few people with signs and banners on site so that you don't spread the virus. So we did that for several years, and we had 750 pairs of shoes that we laid out on the last Saturday of every month in different locations with different themes and so forth. So we kept the community protest movement going through those shoe strikes. Now, shoe strikes, about a year ago, they started dwindling, and because everybody was vaccinated fully several times over, and we're feeling comfortable about gathering again. So then in the last year, we have been trying to convert our shoe strike movement back into an in-person protest effort. That has struggled a little bit. So people got out of the habit of gathering in large numbers. But I think we will be able to get the large protests going again. We're working in the right direction anyway.
Great, thanks.
So that's the protest part. We have 14 different climate action teams here in Flagstaff that are climate action teams of NAZCAs that are all working on different elements of Flagstaff's carbon footprint. David Spence, who's here with us, has started the Hydrogen Hub Climate Action Team, and more recently the Community Choice Aggregation Climate Action Team, which is about putting together enabling legislation that would allow us to get more small-scale renewable energy and clean energy producers into the grid, in essence. Many states have put together community choice aggregate type of legislation that allows cities, for instance, to buy directly from clean energy producers and not have to go through the utility, which, utilities way back when were set up as monopolies. They kind of had to be, because they were supposed to put in generating stations, they were supposed to put in a grid, and you couldn't really do that if you had a bunch of competing interests. And so they were set up as monopolies, but those monopolies no longer make sense. And they've been making it harder for smaller scale renewable energy producers to have access to the market. So anyway, we're working on many different aspects of renewable energy, carbon footprint reduction. We've got a cat that's working on fleet electrification now. And they are pushing the city of Flagstaff, Coconino County, Flagstaff Unified School District, Mountain Line Buses, and Northern Arizona University to electrify their fleets more rapidly than they are at the moment. because again, they've got the goals in place, the plans in place, but they're not implementing them fast enough. So we work on it in a whole bunch of different ways. We've got a lot of people involved in all these different climate action teams. We're always looking for more people to be involved. And then if we can get our public protests back up to significant numbers, that'll solidify our presence in the community. But right now we do the Spotlight on Climate. We do this speakers series. We've got film series that the Vegan Cat has put on a film series recently. So we try to interface with the community in a wide variety of ways. I should say not all the climate action teams necessarily agree with each other on what the best approach is, but that's okay because they've got their energy into their approach, and that influences people.
Is your column in the newspaper a weekly column? You're able
It's a
to
monthly column.
monthly, okay.
And the way that came about actually was we were doing shoe strikes. And the very first shoe strike we did, we got front page coverage both on a Saturday and Sunday, back to back, in the newspaper. Then
Great.
every month we sent out our flyer and our press release to the Daily Sun newspaper, and we were ignored. Month after month after month. We already covered that. This is not new, even though each theme was different, each location was different, different things. And so we realized that not only were they not covering us, they were not covering the issue of climate change nearly enough. Here's a global crisis, and it makes it into the paper maybe once a week when there are catastrophes going on globally every day. So we started a campaign that we called March Media Madness, and it was a letter to the editor writing campaign all through the month of March. And then our shoe strike at the end of the month was planned to be at the Daily Sun headquarters. Surprisingly, believe it or not, I always sent those press releases out on a Wednesday evening prior to a Saturday shoe strike protest. That particular Thursday morning, I get a call from the editor of the Daily Sun. Oh, Stefan, I'm so sorry. I think your press releases have been ending up in my junk folder or something or other. And why are you planning a protest at our headquarters? We're not the bad guys here. And I said, you guys kind of are. You're not publishing nearly enough about this global crisis that everybody should be addressing daily. By the end of the conversation, he had offered for us to write a monthly column in the Daily Sun about climate change. So that's how that came about.
That's awesome.
It was a letter to the editor writing campaign. Everybody was writing a letter to the editor every day during the month of March. And if they published them all, it was going to be a thank you protest. If they just published some of them, it was going to be somewhere in between protest. Anyway, they published just about all of our letters, but they really didn't change the number of stories about climate change beyond our letters. So we had a protest where oh man, they had shoes everywhere. We had to walk down the block of the main street and then up the block to their headquarters and then up their front steps, which were 40 or 50 steps long. And we had Julian Assange there, who was speaking about freedom of press. And we had somebody standing in for him.
Okay.
He was not really there. But anyway, people read their letters on the steps of the Daily Sun. They did have somebody come out of the building and take a picture, and so that got into the paper. Anyway, we had folks, all across the spectrum. How should we do this protest? Should it be should we be parking a pickup in front of their door so that nobody could come in and out? Should we be chaining ourselves to the door? Those kinds of things. But we decided, no, we wanted to do a civil protest because being uncivil wasn't going to get us anywhere anyway in this particular context. that doesn't mean that we have decided never to do an uncivil protest, but in this particular instance, it didn't make much sense. Right now, there's a climate action team that's concerned about the transport of uranium ore through town. They've opened up a uranium mine on the edge of the Grand Canyon again, and we're expecting that at some point in the near future, they will be transporting that ore through town. And there's a group that's ready to go and block the road. They are ready to be disobedient. We also have the film Disobedience being shown at NAU as part of their Better World film series coming up. And David Spence, David Spence is still with us, and I will be among the panelists speaking at that film showing. Boy. So anyway, we hit it from a large number of different angles. I also run the Sustainable Ambassadors program on campus, and we reach a lot of students that way. To get this little micro badge, they have to take Climate Change 101 and Sustainability 101, and then attend a workshop in which they apply what they learned about climate change and sustainability to their personal and professional lives. So, like I said, we try all angles we can think of. How about y'all? What kinds of successes and challenges have other folks been having? Are y'all part of an activist community?
Yeah.
Yeah, very good. And if you're not, I mean, if you're not part of an activist community, begin to build one.
We have a committee as part of our Unitarian Universalist Church in Encinitas, north of San Diego, on the
Very
coast.
nice.
And some of us, we've had several vegan potlucks that have been popular. And, it's hard for me to make the change. I still eat a lot of meat. And it's those personal decisions that are kind of hard to do. And I was interested in what Robert Bell was saying about the curve of the smokers, and if we can get enough people individually, because what I hear over and over again is, well, it's all very nice to make personal decisions, but that's just a drop in the bucket. So that thinking makes it hard to get people on board and be religious, quote unquote, about changing the way they live every day, which is not easy. So anyway, but we support each other in our committee. We get a lot of support out of the fellowship, and it's so we're doing what we can, and we change our we do whatever we can come up with, and I think it's making a dent in our fellowship. That is making an impact.
Very good. Are you by
with
any
5
chance?
minutes notice. My understanding is there was a breach in Brisbane getting poured. All going on.
What?
I think we might have been hearing some radio. Joe Sipigora, you've got your hand raised. Please join in.
All right. Okay. All right. I'm from New Jersey, the metropolitan area. In my case, we have the same problems that all the states do. But in my personal, in my case, I'm also a member of a Unitarian Universalist church, and there's some, yeah, there are some states in which the Unitarian Universalist churches have kind of come together to form social justice group. In our case, it's called the UU Faith Action New Jersey, and we have several task forces, one of which is environment. So we select every year, we select 2 or 3 issues that we feel we could deal with a focus on social justice and getting them, the least of us, to be their problems that are, that are being caused by climate, focusing on them, because lots of times the solutions benefit the wealthier people because they can afford it. For example, the typical EV purchase. You can't ask somebody who makes $20,000 a year to buy an EV, right? So, and we have some neighborhoods in the state that are really being harmed by industry. And so what I'm really getting at, that's just one organization I'm involved in. I'm also involved in, okay, this could take a little time, I'm sorry. So I think having a focus on the social justice aspect is very helpful here. It helps you narrow down, and it's probably the most important part, because if people live in flood zones or hazardous areas, the high rates of asthma because of truck traffic, etc. If we can get laws passed that will benefit them, they're going to be laws that benefit everybody, whereas it doesn't always trickle down, but it will trickle up. That's the first thing. And the second is, I'm involved in I'm in one of the states that's committed to try to get a green amendment in our state constitution. And I'm sorry, I don't know if someone's asking me a question or not here.
I don't think
okay.
so.
Oh, okay. So it's something to consider. It's not something that happens overnight. We've been working on this for 6 years. We were very close to passing it last year, and we're even closer this year. So I think it's going to be a reality in a couple of years. And by having an amendment, you have something even stronger than legislative policy, because policy changes, with every legislature, every time there's a vote. And then there's a much more strength in our arguments to keep, we'll say, certain industries from getting permits in the first place, because you could point out how it would be have a negative effect on certain communities, rather than waiting for the damage to be done and then fighting it. So I know New Mexico, Hawaii, Connecticut, there are a bunch of states, I can't even keep up with them, that are now in the process of trying to get green amendments. So it's something you can work on, because it's a very overall, it kind of is a bigger picture, but we need big pictures and we need little pictures, right? So we have to kind of do both at the same time. I'm also involved in Citizens Climate Lobby, which acknowledged that it was formed by people who were on both sides of the aisle, and realized that you really can't get legislation passed that is going to stand any length of time unless you get bipartisan buy-in. And that's what they've been working on. It's a nonpartisan group, and it's basically presenting a way to, by the way, they're doing a lot on that electrify right now. You mentioned that much earlier, electrifying homes, etc. But what they've done is commit to taxing or charging a fee to fossil fuel companies at their point of what do you call it? At the point of extraction. Yeah. Okay. And of course, that will drive prices up, right? Because they're going to pass the buck right to the consumer.
What I like to say is right around.
So,
No, sorry. I'd love you to say that if you want.
Yeah, I'm almost done, and I'm really sorry I am taking long. I realize I'm taking longer than the others. But these are just things that other states are doing, and I thought by chiming in, we're helping each other, you know, by giving each other ideas and ways to go. But with this one, you tax the fossil fuel companies at their extraction, where they're extracting the fuel. They're going to raise the prices to pass the tax to the consumers. Consumers will be very unhappy. However, if they get a check in their household every month, which comes from all the fees that have been collected from the fossil fuel company, they may not feel so bad, you know. So this is a way of helping consumers deal with it while the non-fossil fuel companies catch up and can compete better. By the way, they can compete pretty well now, but okay. So that
Yeah,
I've
no,
said it.
the
I've said
CCL's
enough, yeah.
efforts, CCL's
Yeah.
efforts are very good, and they're working at the national level, and so
Yeah.
you know, hopefully
No,
they
we're
will have
working on
success.
we're working locally too. We're working
Yeah, right.
very locally. So the whole point is that there are a lot of pieces on the board that you move, and it seems like you're doing that in Flagstaff. You're doing a lot of stuff, but it's not only individuals that have to make changes. We have to make changes, big scale changes too. And I'll pass.
Thank you very much, Joe.
You're welcome.
Robert, you've got your hand up, and Derek, I think you were trying to speak. Is that correct? Anyway, Robert, go ahead, and then Derek, jump in if you want to.
Okay. The electrification thing and what I expressed before about the corporate level of climate coaching and the individual level of climate coaching, there's a nice simile that just came to mind. There's 40 million gas stoves out there. They're all producing a lot of bad stuff that we just found out about a few years ago. I got an induction burner for $50 and I put it on top of a cookie tray on top of my stove, and I don't use my gas stove anymore. And my city is all hot to get electric only in 3 years in Ashland, Oregon, so that it's illegal for anybody to put a gas stove in. But practically speaking, you can just get a $50 induction, and it's much better. It's got the temperature on it, the timer's on it. You go click, 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 boom, and it's really, really good. It's not an electric stove, it's an induction stove or induction burner. It's just a simple individual level that 40 million people could all do. Well, there's not 40 million stoves, there's 40 million people on gas stoves. But if a huge majority of those could very simply just shift over to an induction burner and leave their gas stove there. Now, this is a sunken cost. We've, put in the gas for the stove, we put in the gas stove itself, we put in the malls, we put in the freeways. Those are sunken costs. We just have to just let that go. If people stop driving on freeways and going to malls and stuff, let that go, even though it was the height of the 60s, putting in I-5. Another thing, a simple idea I've had, which is really too wild to say, but I gotta say it. Weight Watchers had a sort of a group weight scale years ago where you get together, everybody weigh themselves, come back to the next meeting and weigh themselves and try and lose weight together. You could do that with carbon. There's so many careful carbon calculators out there, especially from Le Monde in France, that you could calculate your miles driven, your flights if you still take them, and your cooking or how many refrigerators you've got, put them into the thing, get a number, and all come together and just compare your weight, compare your carbon weight, all at a local level. Anyway.
Thank you very much, Robert. So Jason put a comment in the chat about start out with a petition, start out with a sign-up sheet. So Jason, tell us about the strategy.
Okay. No, I just wanted to reply. I think if you, this is where organizing starts. It doesn't start with 0, it starts with 1. So I forget who made that comment, but you're the one that will start this. And so, you just need someone else. And I don't know if anyone had ever seen, there's a kind of famous YouTube video that showed in leadership series a lot. And it's actually the second person to follow, right? That really makes a big difference in terms of getting other people on board. And so you know, if you just moved back there, if you still have friends in town from high school that are not doing anything or whatever, you went off to college, you came back to your hometown, you know, just try to find some folks who are like-minded, go to events. It can be just normal community events, farmers markets. You might get kicked out. I mean, NAZCCA started with our president and board members just petitioning outside of grocery stores and stuff like that. And then if they were asked to leave, they would leave. And, you know, and not encouraging you to do anything illegal, but just, you know, ideally public property on sidewalks, you know, ask folks in parks, at community events, try to get a table if you can. I mean, if you can't, see if you can canvas, if not, stand outside the ticketed entrance and until they ask you to leave or something. But you just need to get some other folks to sign up, and it can start, like Stefan said, I said a sign up sheet. But if you have something in mind for your city, what does your city need? Do you guys have a carbon action plan, right? Do you have a carbon a plan to get to net zero within a certain amount of time? Are your city, you know, are the building efficiencies, is everything else right on track? And if not, if you can find a project, then instead of a sign-up sheet, have a petition. And it can be very informal. You don't have to make, you know, you don't have to make it go through the legislature and, you know, try to actually get something on the ballot. You can start with a petition if you want, and about your cause, and generate enthusiasm around that. Ask folks if they'll volunteer, reach out to them within 2 days, ideally, and see how they can help. Start setting some meetings, and I think in no time you're going to have at least a small group of people to start going with, and keep it rolling and just snowball it after there. And so that's my advice. Thanks, Stefan.
Thank you, Jason. So, Derek, do you still, yes, I see you got your hand up. So yes, go for it.
Yes, and I defer to the lady on the right, my wife.
Nancy.
Hi, I'm Nancy, and we're in San Diego, and we are co-founders of the chapter here in San Diego of the Climate Mobilization Effort, which is a national organization getting people to understand what we need is a national clean energy grid built. So as long as we're having electric stovetops and cars and whatever else, and we're plugging it into the local nuclear plant or to our normal sources of electricity, we really are not doing what we need to do. We need to have a new energy system, and to do a new energy system, we need to build the infrastructure. So we work every Saturday, and hi, John, it's great to see you, with a dedicated group.
Talk about who John is.
John is our co-founder, webmaster, San Diego. But every Saturday we go either to our post office, or now we're going to our local food co-op, and we're asking people to write the president, and we will put a stamp on the envelope. It's the best 57 cents you want to spend. And what we found is that someone from the correspondence unit of the White House told us that if you write a handwritten letter on a single subject, it gets put into a priority pile that they pick letters out of for the president to read. If the president reads the letter, it counts for hundreds of thousands of voters. But even if the president doesn't read the letter, a reader has to read the letter. And the Biden administration happens to be very organized and very efficient. And if you include your address, they will write you back.
Say what the letter's got in it.
So here's what the letter says. Dear Mr. President, please declare a national emergency, not a climate emergency, a national emergency which has the force of law, in order to address the climate crisis that is escalating. Thank you, your name, your address. Now, if you want to get really fancy, you can include, please declare a national emergency to address the climate crisis, and support the build out of a new energy system as computer modeled by Mark Jacobson in Stanford. So if you people do not know about Mark Jacobson, he has over the last 13 years computer modeled the conversion of 149 countries to wind, water, and solar. He's just written his last book, his third book, called No Miracles Needed, which shows that everything has been accounted for. We know where all the lithium is, where all the hydroelectric is, where all the wind is, where all the sun is. We have the plan. And we know that Biden has met with Mark. So we know that Biden knows about the plan also. So this is what we do every Saturday. We get people to write letters to the president, and that's what we say in front of our co-op now. We're doing it. Would you like to write to the president and ask him to declare a national emergency? And a lot of people are pretty clueless, but you'd be surprised how many teachers stop and say, oh my gosh, this is something my kids could do. This gives us an opportunity to really put civic action into action. And people are getting letters back and they're feeling like they're connected with their government. And we don't know what Biden is thinking about these letters, if he's even seen any. But what we know is there are people in the administration that are having to read the letters and sort the letters. And we've spent a lot of time working in politics, and we know that elected officials do pay attention to what they hear about. That's what happens. If you're not talking about it, if they're not reading about it, they don't think it's happening. So we encourage all of you. I'm so excited to see so many people who have the potential, first of all, of writing your own letter. And it's very simple to write a letter because we all know it's President Joe Biden, White House, Washington, D.C. And it's 57 cents. And the message is declare a national emergency to address the climate crisis. So if all of us did it, and then we told one other person to do it, it would be awesome. So thank you, Stefan, for this opportunity. And thank you all for being here and being awake to, as someone earlier described it, the biggest crisis of our time.
Well, Nancy, thank you very much for sharing your campaign. I've got to ask, are you guys part of the North County Climate Change Alliance?
Absolutely.
Which is our sister organization in North County, San Diego. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, you guys shared one of our founders, Rolf vom Dorp, helped to found North County Climate Change Alliance as well as NAZCCA.
Wow, I didn't know that.
So, and I know when you started mentioning Mark Jacobson, I saw his presentation that North County Climate Change Alliance put on.
Super.
Wow.
Very good.
And Stefan, you're in Escondido?
No, I'm in Flagstaff, Arizona. I'm recently retired faculty from Northern Arizona University and a board member of NAZCCA, the Northern Arizona Climate Change Alliance.
Thank you. I just want to say one thing that Al Gore said the other day. He said, watching the evening news is like taking a nature walk through the book of Revelations. I don't know much about the book of Revelations, but I know Al Gore is an avid student of
Mark.
Of what?
Mark.
He's of Mark Jacobson, and also the Bible.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, so we all try to gather people for a particular campaign. And if you have something that people feel I can make a difference with that, people will join because everybody is desperate. Everybody is depressed. Everybody is totally shaken up by the challenge that humanity faces right now.
Right.
And so, yeah, you give them an opportunity to accomplish something.
We have found these letters do that.
Yes. So let me get to Frank. Frank, thank you very much for joining us. I see you got your hand raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Hi to everyone. I think the way we understand climate change on our side is that climate change means long-term changes into the earth temperatures and the weather patterns. Yeah. Climate change, to some extent, is natural, but it is exacerbated by the human economic activities for survival. Yeah. So, burning of fossil fuels such as coal, oil, natural gas, generate greenhouse gases, which trap it into the Earth atmosphere and cause the global temperatures to rise. We are in South Africa here. We are working on the grounds, but your approach, because this thing is cultural first. Our approach is not your approach there in the USA, Arizona, North Arizona. This is not like that. This sounds like theories people can talk, but to get people on board, they need a small, tangible projects so that people can solidify, let me say, their experience, can learn something from what is all about the climate change. It is not like in Europe where people can go make it up and down and read the news. And no, we don't have that culture in Africa to read all the time. This is a big theory. We need projects, small projects to be run at the level of the grassroots so that the people can feel, can know what is all about. Like even in the small projects at the level of like primary school, to introduce those things at the grassroots, like primary school,
We've done
secondary
Zoom
school.
meetings on a cell phone.
Go ahead, Frank. Sorry.
So, yes, so please, we need small projects. We need some tools like, cameras, like microphone, so that we can solidify our presence in the community. We can interface with the community. And this is a big deal, like for some NGOs at the level of grassroots level. So we are not like you there in USA, well organized, and you must do this at the national level, right to the president, right to this. No, here in Africa, people are still like they not knowing what is the climate change all about practically. This is a real problem. You see, so on our side, we need small projects implementation.
Things like
so that,
tree planting, maybe.
Yes, something like that. But not like at the level of literature. Okay, people are going to read. People don't have that culture, really. Yeah, this is my contribution, the way we can like campaign. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Frank. Each culture needs a different approach. But I think it's similar to what you've got. We also need projects. We need things where people can feel like it makes a difference. And so the tree planting and related types of things, regenerative agriculture, which many of the native farmers, indigenous farmers probably already do, but educating people about it, all of those things would be a better fit in your culture than he's saying we need to electrify our fleets now, right?
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that, Frank, and thank you for joining us from South Africa.
Good.
Kathy, you've got your hand up.
Hi, I joined late. I apologize, but I was actually on a meeting talking about some actions we're taking in North San Diego County. So I'm a school board member in North San Diego County in Carlsbad. And when I ran in 2014, I ran on solar panels on every school to where we could take one-time dollars and turn it into ongoing savings in Carlsbad. We've made a $7 million investment in solar, and we have $300,000 every year that we are saving from from our electric bill that is now going back into the classrooms. So what we're doing is we're taking that kind of model and that approach, and we're spreading it around throughout San Diego County. And so in electrification of schools, what happens a lot in climate action, it's surprising to me, but schools get left out of the picture. We do all these climate action plans at the city level and all that, or we ban plastic bags or single-use plastic, yet that ordinance doesn't apply to the school district. So I've really spent a lot of my time really completely focusing in on schools and how schools can be kind of the we call them resiliency hub for the communities. And so one of the things that we've been working on with 350.org, so I'm the chair of the 350.org North County team. So this is a new thing. So we're able to focus our efforts in North County and climate action campaign. And we're going to school districts and getting resolutions for full electrification by 2030. And how we're helping them as well is by talking to them about the savings, as well as the how we can help them get grants and bonds, because usually you have to pass a school bond to get some infrastructure in order to do this stuff. So we're not only saying, here, pass this resolution and we're going to leave. We're saying, here, pass this resolution, and then we're going to stay and walk precincts to help you pass a bond to get this, to make this happen in your school district, right? So it's connecting the education community with the environmental activist community and making things happen at that level. And it's a very powerful force. Our bond that we passed in 2018 in Carlsbad, and we're a pretty conservative area, it passed by 62%. And that's a tax. So people are taxing themselves, saying, yes, you can tax me for our schools and to help our environment. And so we're trying to take that approach on waste, on solar and different renewable energy, and also food. So, moving towards a plant-based food system in our schools. So that's kind of what our approach is and what we're doing here in North County and throughout San Diego. So we have San Diego unified, Sweetwater unified, Carlsbad is on deck, and I think in about 2 months to pass a resolution, and we're looking at Vista unified and San Diego High School District. So those are we should have 5 by the end of the year, we're hoping.
Very nice. Good work. Thank you very much for that good work. So I was saying earlier, we've got a Fleet Electrification Now climate action team here in Flagstaff, and they are trying to work with the school districts to encourage them to electrify their fleets more rapidly. But as Frank was saying, you've got to have the right project for the right person. And so we have a ped and pedal climate action team. They work on changing the infrastructure for bike pathways and bike lanes and all that kind of thing, and the programming of the crosswalk stoplights to make it easier for bicyclists to commute. So there's so many different ways. David, you've got your hand up, and I know you work on several of the different climate action teams.
Yeah, my name is David Spence. I'm in Flagstaff like Stefan, and I just like to compliment Kathy Rawlings' actions to get involved as an activist by campaigning and getting on a local school board. I'm trying to do the same thing with our Flagstaff City Council. In the past couple of years, our local city council has been dragging their feet on the implementation of our climate action plan. And so I've decided to run for city council. And this is not an option that's available to everyone. But if you can think of some civic organization, say a city council, a school board, a planning and zoning commission, a pedestrian committee at your city government, any kind of civil involvement can make a difference if you're coming from a climate action motivation. You can take that into the government level, either local, state, or national. So thank you, Kathy, for sharing that.
And yeah, thank you, Kathy. And then likewise, thank you, David, for running for city council. I mean, that's a huge commitment. So we are hoping and working to get you elected because we know that you would be the right voice on that city council. So other folks who are there other folks who are doing things that you would like to share with the group? Because I can keep talking about the climate action teams in Flagstaff all night if y'all want, but so here's another little thing. We refer to our 14, actually 15 now, different climate action teams as CATs. And if there's just a new CAT that's just forming, or one that has been active in the past and has kind of become dormant, we refer to them as kittens. So we've got a lot of cats and kittens, and we realize that with that terminology, we realize we need to foster and help the kittens to develop and, help them by empowering them in whatever way is needed for their particular cause.
Stefan.
Yes,
Hi
Julian.
there. G'day. Kia ora koutou. Hello, everybody. Yeah, I'm Julian down in New Zealand, Aotearoa, the Waiponamu, New Zealand, and I'm sorry to interrupt you. I'm really interested in that. I'm making notes on what everybody's been saying just now. It's really fascinating. I'm kind of gutted that I got the time difference wrong, and so I logged in thinking, oh, nice and early. I listened to Bill, and just as he was finishing off. But anyway, it's been a great consolation prize. Listen to all you guys and everything you guys are doing. I just I'm nearly late for another meeting. I've got to shoot out too, but I wanted to say, amongst the issues that are coming up here in New Zealand recently, is primary, I think, in my mind anyway, is the influence of the Atlas network, which is had a huge influence just recently here in that they've funded the three major New Zealand branches of the Atlas network, and various others, of course, have funded a minor political party to get in, right, 8% of the vote, and the former coalition party government with the other centre-right and the other kind of all over the place, sort of centre-rightish minor party, and they're having a huge influential impact. And then also on local level government stage, earlier last year, probably New Zealand's 5th or 6th largest city basically was overrun by climate deniers and, well, conspiracy theorists, let's say. And as I'm sure you guys know, there's a very slim margin of difference between conspiracy theories and alternative facts realm and climate deniers and the alt-right. They're basically, it's almost unfair to say it's one block, but I mean, they're trading off of each other and springboarding into the consciousness and through social media. And I'm really glad you said, I think Stefan, maybe some others, the lack of mainstream media coverage of this. So I studied as journalism last year for the hope of, not so much for the hope of getting into mainstream media, but using mainstream media skills in the social media context. And so I'm looking to basically form my own alternative media realm, which deals with degrowth. I'm really glad to hear someone mention about degrowth as well. That's getting huge traction here in New Zealand. We had a big conference right at the end of last year. But again, that's not in the mainstream so much. So I'm glad to hear people mention about the history of what's it called? Civil disobedience. We've got a group that's changed tack last year. Now we're focusing on, we've gone from promoting railroads, which have been basically dismantled since about the year 2000, Now we're focusing on stopping cruise ships, which seem to be growing. And I didn't realize, but I know they've used horrible quality of oil for shipping, as cargo ships do too. But it's just layers of absurdity with cruise ships. People flying to get on a cruise ship to another place, and then the cruise ship itself is like something like 1 million cars worth for one trip. It's worth looking into. Anyway, I gotta go. Just kia ora koutou. Really nice to see you all. And
Julian, thank you
thanks
so much
having
for
me pop
joining
in.
us. And I was just talking to the Sustainable Ambassador students this morning. I gave guest lectures in the ENV 101 class. And I was just telling them, we can no longer afford leadership that does not understand these things. And so we've got to form our own political parties, run for office, and take over that leadership with people who know what's happening.
Right on. We've got to be a lot more confident in encouraging people, family and friends who we know trust the science to get out there and put themselves forward, because every time we don't, then the conspiracy theorist types like my sister, people we know and love and trust to have good hearts, they're being led down the wrong path, and they're going to end up leading into, you all know about, I hope, about the Tea Party and how that's eaten out the Republican Party there. Koch Industries Brothers and all the rest. So we've got to keep talking about that, keep opening eyes, and good luck to us all.
Thank you, Julian. Good luck with
Good
your
to see you
work. I hope it all makes a big difference. Sounds like you guys are heading in the right direction.
Cheers.
Cheers.
See you later.
All right. So we've kind of been sharing different strategies and examples of what people are doing to fight climate change. Again, I could keep talking about examples, but I would love to hear from y'all. So anybody else want to share? And I know some of you have put the comments in the chat. So since I'm slow at reading, please bring your comments forward, share them, unmute yourself, and join in the conversation.
I was
Hello?
wondering. Oh, I'll go ahead.
Oh,
Go ahead.
no, you're fine. You're doing fine. So Julian actually invited me to participate. I hope you don't mind. I'm just going to leave my picture on there. There's a 3-party system in New Zealand. So when he signed off, I'm not sure what that question was addressing. But here in Phoenix, there's a group from the ASU School of Sustainability that's called Green Light, and they've been pretty active in trying to help with at least the recycling part, and getting the numbers correct when it comes to what energy use businesses use. So I apologize. I also was kind of late because I was working earlier today, but quantifying and keeping the math transparent is, I think, a really big part of it. Last year, I worked for City of Phoenix in their education department, and sitting on the city council with one of the greenest mayors that we've ever had. That was part of what the education department had to do. Now, we are very lucky in that we have our mayor, but most of the energy in Phoenix is all nuclear. So even though we want to push electric cars, all of those electric cars are from a nuclear power source. Now, I have a couple of degrees at this point, and the first one was from up at NAU in environmental science, but I feel as though the numbers did not account for the amount of nuclear energy that were used to power electric cars. Now, I'm very curious to hear what this group proposes is some solutions to make sure that what we're putting out into our environment isn't going to have a long-term cost that's higher than we anticipated.
Yes, thank you very much, Elizabeth. Excellent question. So here in Flagstaff, we are really lucky that several businesses have been installing green, clean electric generation capacity. So we have 99 megawatts of wind power coming from the Perrin Ranch power plant. We have 129 megawatts of clean electricity coming from the Dry Lake Hills wind power plant. As we speak, Babbitt Ranches is putting in 161 megawatts of wind power and another 80 megawatts of solar photovoltaic. And also next year they will start to build another 480 megawatts of photovoltaic power plant. Just outside of Winslow, which is a little neighboring burg just to the east of us, they are putting in at Chevelon Butte another 470 megawatt wind power plant. So in just a couple of years, we will have a 1,424 megawatts of clean electricity. So that's the basis on which we're pushing folks to electrify. If we didn't have the clean electricity, it wouldn't make much sense. So we've got to push, we need a climate action team to push for the clean electricity, another climate action team to push for opening up the grid so that cities can buy directly from clean energy providers, another group that's looking at pushing school districts and others to electrify their fleets more rapidly, and encouraging individuals to take advantage of the incentives for buying electric vehicles. One can buy used electric vehicles for very cheap, relatively cheap. I looked the other day at Carvana. I'm not promoting Carvana, but they had 8 pages of used electric vehicles for under 15,000. And in the current car market, that's pretty phenomenal. If you look at the Ford F-150 Lightning, the workhorse edition of that truck is in the 40,000s. That's the same as for combustion pickups. So yes, we think of EVs as very expensive, and many of them are, but they're not all that expensive. So they're coming down, and the more of us that buy them, the further they'll come down. So again, gather a community of activists. Start with a small thing that they can accomplish, and then build from there. You don't stop that group. Let them keep accomplishing that, but use their success as motivation for another group to start their action that they're most excited about, and empower them. So one of the things that helps NAZCCA empower members to get their message out is that we've collected over 14,000 signatures here in Flagstaff from Flagstaff citizens. The entire town is only about 80-some thousand people, including neighborhood bedroom communities. So with that, we've got contact information for all those folks. When we want an action, we can reach out to a lot of folks. And so Fossil Free Arizona, which is another group that's looking to push people to divest, banks and institutions to divest their money from fossil fuels. They joined in because we have this database for reaching large numbers of climate concerned people in our community. So, Jason was saying that start with a petition. There's more power in that even than what he was saying. It's the second person that joins that makes the biggest difference. But as those numbers grow, you can pull people in and then have a tool to empower them to accomplish what their particular emission reduction goal might be. Anyway, that was me again. Sorry. David Jones wants to join. Okay, come in, David. So it's amazing to me we're still having people join the meeting. Frank, you're thinking of something.
No, I'm just listening and appreciating what you are saying.
Thank you.
I've heard a lot of great ideas for events and ongoing campaigns, so thank you everyone. But I was also wondering how you keep it fun in the climate movement. Just in South Florida, we had a group chat that was just called Climate Memes for the young folks to share, their funny pictures. So I'm just wondering what's the most fun action you've had, or other ways that you might sort of keep the movement energetic because that's something I've struggled with since 2020.
I struggle with that generally. I don't have much of a sense of humor. And I'm such a scientist that I'm just not good at that aspect. But I should say, in our shoe strikes, we've had humorous themes. And David, who has his hand up right now, I'm hoping he will talk about our Halloween shoe strike, which included Grim Reapers dancing around a bonfire made out of cardboard and paint. And I should let David tell the story about what his act was within that particular protest. It's really cool.
Well, I built a coffin, and then it was an open coffin, so I laid down on my back in the coffin and put the coffin over the sidewalk, thinking that this would be civil disobedience. But the police just drove by and didn't pay any attention to the fact that I was obstructing a sidewalk. So that was fun. One thing that has been entertaining in several of our protests is we have a polar bear costume. It looks very realistic, and a person obviously inside the polar bear costume. And at one point last spring, we were having a protest, or maybe it was Earth Day. I can't remember.
It was Earth Day.
We found a snowbank that was in the shadows. So I scooped a bunch of snow into the back of my truck, and we piled the snow around the polar bear outfit at Earth Day, when the temperatures were, melting the snow. And that was pretty dramatic. We've had a lot of fun with the polar bear costume.
Well, that was a great example, because we could then talk about, well, here's the polar bear's habitat. There's not much left. It's melting. And there was a dramatic example. So, that engaged the kids. There was a little bit of humor in it. And so when David brought in that snow, it was just perfect. You probably had something else when you had your hand up, David.
No, I think I've shared what I need to share. I agree. It's important to keep it light and encourage people to think of humorous connections, because that's what will draw people in even more than the civil disobedience. If you can involve people, get their emotions linked into the climate action, they're more likely to stick with it.
Thank you, David.
I'm wondering if the people in Flagstaff are working with the Sierra Club that's been pretty active in that area.
So in the past, the Sierra Club was very active here, particularly with air quality issues around the Grand Canyon.
Right.
Right now, they're between community organizers. Allison Gitlin left recently. But Kay Bordwell has kind of been their hub of activity here, and she's been coming to our NAZCCA weekly organizational meetings. Statewide, Sandy Barr is really the big mover and shaker, but she does a lot of lobbying type of work in Phoenix. Anyway, so yes, we work with them whenever we have the opportunity.
There was, I can't remember his name, who was on the city council, who was a Sierra Club member. I don't know whether he's still there or not.
There was Joe Shannon. I'm not sure. He wasn't on city council, though, I don't think.
I know Joe, but also can't think of his name. Anyway, I was in Phoenix for several years and worked with Sandy and the group there. So, but I know the Flagstaff group has had some organizational problems from time to time. So,
well, right at the moment they are, but Kay's kind of holding it together, and they join in on some of our activities, and so they keep something there for their members to be involved in.
That's great.
Nancy, go ahead. You got your hand up.
Yeah, so I want to say donuts. So when we meet, do not forget that people like to eat stuff. And they like to eat fun stuff. So sometimes when we're feeling very righteous, we'll have bagels. And those are good. But when we have donuts, we're happy. And then also one of our events, we got a horse, and then we got one of our retired congressmen to ride the horse into our big central park in San Diego, Balboa Park, dressed as Paul Revere to sound the alarm that climate change was coming, not the British. And that was really fun, except we decided to be really authentic and do it at midnight. And somehow we dampened our participation a little bit. But I think there are some things that people can do that are creative. I don't know about fun exactly, because this is such a anxiety producing reality that, you know, it's hard to walk that line between what's really happening and fun. But I think it can be, we can remember why we're doing it. You know, we can remember to have music and definitely caring for each other, so that we can remember that we're human and that's why we're doing it.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Nancy. And I think what you're describing is street theater. So a good protest, I think, has some attractive ideas expressed in street theater. You know, some people do it with hangman's nooses that show that things or people are on the edge of death. We kind of did that with our Halloween protest and the Grim Reapers and David in his coffin. You know, so you can do it in all kinds of creative ways that gets people's juices flowing.
Extinction Rebellion set baby carriages on fire.
That's pretty dramatic.
Pretty dramatic. It's better, I guess, than throwing tomatoes at Van Goghs, but that's another thing they do.
Well, there's different levels of disobedience, you know, and you want to pick your level carefully. David is part of the Hall No group that is fighting the uranium ore transport through town, and they're ready to block the roads.
Yeah.
But they're going to be careful to not do that in a way that blocks the general public from using the road, but blocks the trucks transporting the ore. You know,
Yeah,
that's going to be a little bit of a trick, but we don't want to piss people off.
Right.
We want to get them to support us. So we want to block the trucks without blocking the people.
Yep.
One thing I just want to share from Miami is sometimes there are mass fish killings. I'm not sure if this has ever happened in your communities, just where a lot of animals will die from whatever pollution from red tide. And so in Miami in 2020, the Biscayne Bay was inhospitable to life, like the oxygen ran out or something. There's a lot of dead fish. And when we visited it at night, there were literal puffer fish that I thought were baseballs just floating all over. It was my first time ever seeing a manta ray in real life, and I saw a baby one just, you know, dead. And the issue is Miami City would send in a whole team to clean up that bay before the next morning to make sure the tourists didn't have to deal with it. So what we did as Extinction Rebellion and Fridays for Future and Sunrise is we went to that park, filled up a large tub full of the dead fish, and then the next morning went and dumped it on the front steps of City Hall. And that got so many journalists like super interested. They were asking us to wait, even only 3 people carried out the action. We just got a lot of coverage from that one because it was a little bit more shocking. But setting up stuff like that was definitely a little bit more exciting and fun than we've had before, than other events that we've had.
Good street theater. Yeah, I'm not sure that I would pick burning baby carriages myself, but certainly letting people know about dead fish in the bay or whatever is very powerful. So Ray, I believe you are located in Sedona, is that correct? Not sure if Ray is with us. All right, well, we've been talking for quite a while now, and I think we should probably move towards shutting down. But if anybody still has a burning example that they would like to share or question or whatever for the group. I want to give everybody one more chance.
Yes, this is Ray in Sedona.
Hello, Ray. Yes, good. I remember you from the community meetings several years ago before COVID.
That's correct. I was planning on starting up with the University of Arizona with my research, creating a new solar cell. And then COVID hit, I had to pull the plans.
So it hasn't
right
happened
now-
yet?
I'm sorry?
It has not happened yet?
No, it has not happened because I'm very reluctant about intellectual property being stolen at this time.
Certainly.
It's not safe out there for that reason. So I don't know. I probably have to take it to my grave.
Oh, well, release it before then.
I'd love to, but you know, it's if you think about what solar energy is, and somebody says battery, that's not really solar energy. The minute you say battery, okay, that's truly not solar energy. If you look at the sun, how big it is compared to the size of this planet, I'm sorry, that's truly not solar energy. So what I've devised can be truly solar energy, night and day. So I'll keep working on it. I'll stay alive.
Well, very nice. And let us know when there is a moment when we can help and empower you in your work in that. You know, you're located in Sedona, but certainly that work would have global applications and implications.
Well, I'm very much, once I get the computer simulation up and running, I will be contacting the Department of Energy.
Very good.
See if they want to step in.
Very good. Well, and Elizabeth, you brought up the predominance of nuclear power down in the Phoenix area a little while ago. But there are also some really large and positive clean energy installations, like the Gila River plant with solar thermal, which can store, they've got the capacity to store 6 billion tons of thermal energy in their molten salt tanks. And then they use that, when the sun goes down, they can use that to power 80,000 homes. So, Jace, thank you for joining us, and you've got your hand up. Please take it away.
Yes, so I've been, avidly following the conversation. I'm in New Zealand, have been here for about 16 years. You can see my accent isn't typical Kiwi, but the point I wanted to make was, aside from the street theater and aside from things that are dramatically shocking or blocking of things which I've been a part of, but I think we need to make sure that we include drawing the artists into this conversation. I'm of the mind that a large part of what moves people in their thinking and in their political, outreach is celebrities, movies, displays that they've seen, talks that they've heard. And so I would like people just to have this idea that when you have like a child's environmental art project, or when you have some sort of a talk, and this is the kind of thing that I'm a part of, I develop these artistic events. It draws artists in that'll be a part of it that would never come to ever come to any other kind of political meeting or event, but they will enjoy coming to an event where they're thinking about costumes after climate chaos, or they will enjoy coming to hear accounts of people that are so awestruck by nature that they will then advocate for or work for environmental causes. So just in your minds, I also want people to realize that there's this whole other category of people out there that are motivated by art, and artists that are motivated by the ideas that you can put forward by them. That's my little offering here.
Perfect. And we've done that. So one of our Spotlight on Climate monthly columns was by Ted Martinez, whose whole point was exactly that. Art Moves the Needle on Climate Change was the title of his spotlight. And there's lots of examples where people are moved by art, and each person has their own suite of things that they're moved by. And so for us, we try to put out the diversity of different communication forms and styles and details, so that we, each one that we put out, we hope will intersect with a certain portion of our community. And we want to keep putting out the diversity of messaging and messaging techniques. All right. David, is your hand up still from the last time, or?
No, I'd like, can you repeat, for people that are still on the call, can you repeat how Bill McKibben's talk, how we can access that?
So it got recorded. It'll take us probably a day before we get it uploaded to the NAZCA website. But in the NAZCA website, that's www.NAZCCA.org, there is a drop-down menu at the top that says Our Work. And under Our Work, one of the choices is Climate Talks for Everyone. And that's where the upcoming climate talks are listed, so you can join in on future presentations. And the ones that have already taken place, that's where the video is located. So you can look them up by topic area and review any one of them, or all of them, as the case may be. And under that same drop-down menu of Our Work, there's also the Spotlight on Climate. And so you can see this coming month will be our 3-year anniversary of putting out that monthly column. And all of the columns that have been published so far are there in PDF form, so you can download them. If you have a subscription to the newspaper, then you can view them on the newspaper's website as well. But they're all there on that page, Spotlight on Climate, under Our Work.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you all very much for the important work that you're doing. Thank you for coming here and listening to Bill McKibben and sharing what y'all are doing. I think we need a community. We're a very social species. And so hearing what others are doing is a really important part of the work that we do. So thank you all very much for coming today. And thanks for sharing your good work everywhere that you're located. South Africa, New Zealand, South Florida, San Diego. Thank you all for being here. Sedona.
Thank
All
you.
right. Well, thank you all,
Thank you.
and have a great night.
Thank you.